Hey, what's going on, guys? Bring your friends here. I made this video today because it's been quite a while since I made the suicide build back in last December, so I decided to make a video to touch up on it and to explain a bunch of things since the meta has quite obviously changed since last December. As far as the build itself, the traits now that I run are 10, 25, 10, 0, 25. I could also run the 25 point into Illusionist Celerity and put it into Illusionary Membrane, which was the original build back in December. It really depends on your playstyle, but usually 15 into Chaos for if you're running against a bunch of bursty teams and you need the protection if you are getting trained. Other than that, for those of you that don't know the build, it is a clone on death build. So basically all your traits, or at least most of them, are revolving around clone death. So traits like crippling dissipation, clones cripple nearby foes when killed, confusing combatants, 3 seconds of confusion when killed, and debilitating dissipation. Clones provide a random condition when they are killed. And then the other two traits are into illusions, which are Master of Misdirection and Blinding Befuddlement, which is cause confusion when you blind a foe. Now, as far as Blinding Befuddlement goes, a lot of people don't like the trait in general because of the fact that it is on a believed 3-second internal cooldown on the granting confusion when you blind. So if you aren't running a lot of blind or just in general, then I wouldn't pick up this trait, but for my build it just works out. But that being said, there are two ways to activate clone death. One is obviously the most simplistic way, is for your enemies to cleave your clones, thus providing all the conditions: a cripple, confusion, and an AoE condition, which is either 3 bleeds, 3 stacks of vulnerability, or weakness. The other way is basically if you have more than 3 clones out on the field at once and you dodge roll, one clone will overwrite another, thus creating the explosion, thus creating clone death and applying the connies as well. Going into my Rune Sets, I'm running the Rune Set of Lissa, full Rune Set of Lissa, mostly for the elite, or for the 6 slot, which is when you use an elite skill, lose all conditions and gain all boons for 5 seconds. I use that with mass invisibility. I believe almost every Mesmer does now these days, just because of the current Condi meta. And then I run Staff, Sword, Pistol. So Staff has energy, Pistol has Sigil of Minor Corruption. I actually changed that from Paralyzation. And then the Sigil of Superior Energy, gain 50% endurance when you swap to this weapon. A lot of people have asked why I run energy over other traits, and the reason is very simple. Is because when you're running energy on your sword and your staff, you're doing 2 things at once as compared to running like full DPS sigils, which is if you have more dodge, you're obviously evading, which is negating damage, and you're doing more dodging, which is obviously more clone death, and more clone death is more DPS. So basically you're doing more defensive and offensive things at the same time with energy than you could with other skills. Let's see. And why Rampager's Amulet? 1, it's got power, precision, vitality, and condition damage, with Berserker's Jewel, with power, precision, critical damage, and vitality. And the reason I run Rampager's Jewel is to get a pretty high crit, decent condition damage, and a not too bad health pool. But one of the reasons I run high crit is obviously because of the build as well. One is because of critical infusion. Gain 5 seconds of vigor when delivering a critical hit. This effect can trigger only once every 5 seconds. So that being said, the more endurance you have, the better. It's pretty much the same theory when it comes to putting on energy sigils. The more endurance you have, the more dodge you have, the more dodge you have, the more clone death you have, and the more clone death you have, the more damage you have. So pretty much the same basis around the amulet as well. Gives decent condition damage, nowhere near the best, but good enough for me. And decent power as well, 1425, nothing too crazy. And let's see, I think that's about it. As far as the utilities, Signet of Domination, Decoy, and Portal, with Mass Invis, as I said, for the Lissa runes. It's a good reset. It's a good con declare. It's good for stomping, for rezzing. It has all around utility. I enjoy using it. It has low cooldown. You can use it quite a lot. So it works out for me. Signet of Domination. When you use that with Magic Bullet, you can get quite a lot of stun when you time it correctly, and that is very good versus pretty much almost every class. I can't really think of a class that more control isn't good for, especially when opening a fight. Openings are very crucial when it comes to Mesmer fights, just because if you screw up once, you're pretty much dead, regardless of the class that you're facing. Your positioning is very crucial with this build. I couldn't stress that enough. And as far as the damage in general, I'll just hit a dummy for you so you can see what type of damage you're getting into it. As far as my rotation goes, it usually revolves around something like this. I would usually opening up with Signet of Dom just because it has the longest range, it has the quickest activation time, and it's not really telegraphed too much, so people can't really see it coming. So that being said, I open up with Signet of Domination. Now, when you're facing classes such as Necros or something, you're always waiting for them to, for most Necros, it really depends, but usually, from my experience, when I open up with Signet of Dom on a Necromancer, for example, they always, the Spectral Armor, they always pop Spectral Armor to get out of the stun, so you immediately follow up with Magic Bullet. So, most of the time, with Signet of Dom, you wait half a second, maybe a second, they hit Spectral Armor, you hit Magic Bullet, they're still stunned, you can continue with your rotation with no worry, because most Necros don't really run more than one Sunbreaker. But that being said, Signet of Dom into Phantasmal Duelist, into Magic Bullet, Illusionary Leap, and then you would dodge, and then mid-dodge you would swap, Blurred Frenzy, you would swap weapons at the same time, you would decoy and then dodge again, and then you would throw down your Chaos Storm, phase retreat through it, Phantasmal Warlock, and then phase retreating through your Combo Storm, you would grant yourself a Chaos Armor just because it has an Ethereal Field, and then once you're done I can't even talk today. Once you're done casting the Phantasmal Warlock, you cast another Chaos Armor just because by that time your first Chaos Armor through the proc would have worn off already, and then you just continue with your rotation. So that being said, now I'll show you the entire thing from beginning to end non-stop. So yeah, that's a general rotation. You pretty much have access to every condition in this build except for Fear and Torment, and quite a lot of it. The least amount of conditions you have is pretty much Confusion, which is why I ran Master Misdirection, Blinding Befuddlement, just because Confusion is the hardest to apply with this build. If you really wanted to run the cheese, as everyone knows, you can just go 30 into Duelist Discipline and run the 100% combo finisher with the Duelist, but since I consider it a bug and so does the Guild Wars 2 wiki, I don't use it quite often other than trolling people in hot joins, just because of the fact that you always have to assume it's going to be fixed and you don't want to base your damage around something that is obviously bugged. So I don't really want to disappoint myself in the near future by running that as a permanent trait over, say, something like Illusionist Celerity, which I would replace it with. Other than that, I believe that's everything. As far as my underwater weapons, it's just Harpoon and then Peacemaker Staff, and then they both have energy on it as well. Other than that, the only other things that I could recommend as far as changing up the build would be putting Berserkers instead of Rampagers, and then possibly changing up your traits into Illusions into something else, because you would have so much clone death that the Warlock would hit for absurd amounts of damage if you were to put Berserkers instead of a Rampager, and more of your damage would be becoming more of a Phantasm build than a clone and death build. Although your retail would be hitting for quite a lot instead of your Confusion, which I would suggest, as I said before, changing the 25 out of Illusions into something else if you were to stray away from this build. Other than that, I think that's everything that I would like to cover for you. The only other thing that I could touch base on is I was streaming the other day and a user asked me why I don't shatter. It is very situational if you are to use Mind Rack or Cry Frustration. The only time I would recommend using these two is if you know that your clones aren't going to be cleaved and it's at the very end of a fight to get somebody down. Therefore, I would use Mind Rack or Cry Frustration depending on positioning of yourself and your clones. Other than that, I would not recommend shattering on this build just because you don't get much of a benefit. The damage isn't that great, and it really, as I said, depends. The only ones that I use on a regular basis are diversion and distortion. Distortion for the stomps, diversion to more or less interrupt a stomp. I don't really use diversion on interrupting a person mid-fight just because those clones could be used for bigger and better things, in my opinion, as far as the Connies in general. And besides, I think I have more than enough control to deal with said target in the middle of a fight. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, put them in the links down below. And yeah, that's about it. I'm Countless, and I'll check you guys later. Peace out.